For those of you who don't know, I'm Luke Stevens-Royer. I'm the minister here at First UU Church. I'm grateful to have you all here on this, I don't know, May, July, whatever kind of day it is. Feels a lot different than spring, but grateful for the warmth and grateful for this time to be together. I'll mainly be monitoring chat and helping with tech, but grateful for the work both that Isaiah is doing and the work Planned Parenthood is doing in so many ways, especially in the public and wider spotlight right now. But that work has always been going on, just a little more in the news. So thank you for continuing that work and all of the intersections of justice work that you're working on. So with that, I invite you just wherever you are, whatever tradition you come from or no tradition at all, just take a breath. Gratitude for the day, gratitude for community, gratitude for our work together for more justice and equity, knowing that it takes us all. So here we are. Get off of my face. We don't need to look at me anymore. And you can see these folks here in the Commons. And I'll turn it over, I think, to Jack to start and introduce our forum together.
Hey everyone, hope you're having a happy Wednesday evening. It is hot and muggy out there, but hope you're all staying cool. Thanks for having us tonight. I was excited to get this invitation to come and be with you all and have a conversation about the issues that we're seeing out there in the world right now that are affecting trans youth and trans people generally, and queer people and members of the LGBTQIA plus community broadly. For those that don't know me, my name is Jack Dudley. I'm an organizer with Isaiah. My pronouns are he, him. I grew up in southern Minnesota. I grew up in Faribault. And a lot of what drew me to organizing or to get involved in politics or political action was the idea that queer people could have real space and real power and not just be accepted and affirmed, but be full people out in public, leading their full lives and having real power in the community. So I want to introduce, the folks that are joining me, TL and Kylie. I'll let you do some introductions and then we'll get some intros from all of you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Hi, everybody. My name's TL. I use they, them pronouns, and I am our youth organizer in the public affairs team at Planned Parenthood North Central States here in Minnesota. I am coming to you from Mankato today. I was living in Rochester not too long ago. I just moved in December and was previously a student at Mayo and did a lot of LGBT organizing in the grad school at Mayo Clinic for a while and around the community. So other than being a queer and trans person myself. And so I have a vested interest in also doing this work with Planned Parenthood too. Kylie, I'll let you go.
Hello, everyone. Happy, what is it? Wednesday? I don't even know what day it is. It's been such a long week already. My name is Kylie and I am an organizer on the same team as TL on the public affairs side of Planned Parenthood Action Fund in the Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. I'm based in the Rochester area. I have been living in Minnesota my whole life. I was actually like a health science student and I was going to be part of I wanted to become a physician assistant, but I completely kind of turned around and realized that I didn't want to be someone who contributed to kind of the system, and I wanted to be someone who advocated to change the system to help people through political advocacy. And so I'm here today to kind of talk about being an ally and kind of the role of an ally and how we can be better allies to the LGBTQ community.
Thanks, Kylie, and thanks, TL. And before I turn things over to TL to give us a broad overview of what is happening out there in the world right now that I think many of us have heard bits and pieces of, but I think we can all get on the same page together with some updates on what's been happening out there with these attacks on trans kids and trans youth. and the community broadly. But before we dig into that, really want to hear from some of you. I didn't quite expect so many of you to be there in person, so I don't know how we'll have the chat feature for all of you. There's no good way for all of you just to type in your names and share who you are. But for those of us joining us on Zoom, if you're able to, in the chat, just share your name and briefly answer the question, why do the rights of trans and queer people matter to you? Whether you identify with any of those communities or you're concerned as a citizen, what is it that, draws your concern around those issues? And I know, Lynn, you might have a couple of people out there prepped in person to share aloud, why do these issues matter to you? And
Do you want us to start with that, Jack?
yeah, that would be great. And people on Zoom can start in messaging in the chat, but I think Lynn can go ahead with the intros in person too.
Awesome. And just for reference, for those in person, there's a microphone kind of here. It picks up pretty well, but if you just kind of want to speak clearly, or you can come closer if you want for folks to be able to hear you.
Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Linda Ehrstrom and I'm with the Wide Welcoming team. And I'm really happy that you're all here. I've got two people, an older member of our team, likewise, and the newest member of our team. And we're going to just briefly talk to you.
So if you want, Patty, you can actually stand right up here, and then they can see you online and they can hear you in here as well.
I'm Patty Trinka. I've been with the church for probably over 40 years, and LGBTQ issues are very important to me. I have many friends who are LGBTQ, and I want them to be able to live a full life safely and comfortably, being accepted in their community and feeling like they really belong and can have a career and an education and a home and just belong in our community. And so we started the Transforming Hearts class here at church a few years back, and to introduce people to the idea of welcoming everyone, including transgender. So that's what we've been doing.
Hi, my name is Nick. Been a member here for 2 months. And as someone who came out as pansexual pretty late in life, the Wide Welcoming team was a good fit. Works really important to me for my own sake, and also just because I think it's really important to fight for the rights of all people. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Thanks, Nick.
My name is Cynthia Dowdy, and I'm here to learn. I have 3 natural grandchildren. One is a trans woman, and one is an autistic homosexual. One is sort of straight, just on a lot of antidepressants. So there I am. And my step-granddaughter is living with a bisexual man. So I have lots to learn. Mostly, what I'm really concerned about is having people have their own sexuality, but integrated in society, just like everybody else. We're all just human. Yeah. My granddaughter, my eldest grandchild, feels comfortable living in Seattle because there's a large LGBTQ community there. I don't think anybody has to live in any kind of community. They have to be accepted by all of us. That's my concern.
Yeah, thank you so much for those introductions. I really appreciate your comments and your personal stories. I think all of us on some level have some level of story in connection to the community, whether we identify ourselves or we know people that we love, or some other connection that we have. So those that are here on Zoom, I would encourage you to also introduce yourself and share in the comments who you are and why these issues matter to you. And as you're doing that, I think I'll turn things over to TL to get us moving. Oh, Shelley, do you have a question?
I just wanted to use my voice. I have a hard time typing in the chat, but I am here because my best friend identifies as gender queer, and I just want to be the best ally I can be, learn as much as I can. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you, Dusty, for jumping in the chat. So I'm actually gonna throw up a PowerPoint really quick because I'm gonna kind of talk about just what's been going on and what we know has been happening over the past few months. Past few years, we could really say, but really coming in full force over the past few months. So let me get my cute little rainbow PowerPoint up. So there has been a huge increase in anti-LGBTQ bills and laws in 2022, but as we can see in this graph here, it has been on the rise for a few years. And it hasn't been until 2022 that I think a lot of people have realized that these bills have been being introduced in across the country and in multiple states. And 65% of the LGBTQ bills that were filed as of March 15th, and there has been more since then, were anti-trans bills. So these bills against LGBT people and trans people are heavily against trans people. And we're seeing that in a quite skyrocketed, unprecedented number here in 2022. And I took a little clip from their Chase Strangio, who is an attorney with ACLU, did a little story on Democracy Now, which highly recommend if you just look Democracy Now, Chase Strangio. But he said, the only way you can stop us from being who we are is by killing us. And that, unfortunately, is starting to feel like the actual objective of these bills. And the reason why I want to start us off with that is because even something as small as book banning, which we'll get into, can have really large detrimental impacts that do lead to the death of queer and trans people, both because of mental health issues and violent attacks. So throughout this year, we've seen a lot of different kinds of bills, especially targeting trans youth. We're seeing bills to restrict healthcare, just like the one that went into effect in Alabama just a couple days ago, which prohibits people from under the age of 19 for getting the gender affirming care that they need to feel good in their bodies and, affirmed by their gender. And this includes puberty blockers, or when they turn 18, top surgery. In some states, you can get it slightly earlier. But healthcare also includes mental health care. It also can include help around social transitioning. And we're seeing attacks on social transitioning and bans on kids getting socially transitioned. So this is names, pronouns, and having their gender affirmed and allowed to wear what they dress at that same time. We're seeing a lot of stuff around single sex facility restrictions. This is a lot of bathrooms and locker rooms and kind of going the opposite of gender neutral bathrooms. Anti-trans athletic bills, which are largely targeted towards keeping trans girls or trans women out of sports. Some trans men are also impacted, but usually this is largely an issue of trans women and girls. We're seeing curriculum restrictions and restrictions of what can be talked about in schools around LGBT, around sexuality, around gender, and all of the above. Access to IDs, and this is access to IDs that match someone's name and someone's their gender and not just their dead names or what's assigned to them at birth. And we're also seeing a rise in religious exemptions where people say that and this is I won't make a birthday cake for a gay wedding because it's against my religion, but to extreme points where lots of companies and lots of people are using their religion as a way to discriminate against queer and trans people, landlords and all of that kind of stuff in some states. This is a lot of text and I just put it in here mostly for me as I talk out loud, but definitely feel free to read if you're able to see. And this is going into a little bit about the Alabama law that passed a few days ago, which makes it a felony to provide gender affirming medical treatment to trans youth. A federal judge is currently waiting to see if there's waiting and deciding if there's going to be a motion to put a temporary hold on it. this gender affirming treatment for trans youth, if a doctor were to provide it, that is 10 years in prison to provide puberty blockers, hormones, medical procedures to trans youth under 19. And other states are considering more severe ones going all the way up to 25. So people who are whole adults, unable to access that. And a lot of this comes from, and you'll hear a lot of false information about puberty blockers and what gender affirming care is actually accessible to young people, how it functions, the safety level, which the answer is it is safe. The stuff that is available to people who are under 18 is safe, like puberty blockers or social transition. There's also been a lot of non-enforceable guidelines both in Texas and Florida. For example, the Florida Department of Health advised healthcare professionals against performing certain gender-affirming care treatments to help trans minors navigate transitioning socially too. And like the numbers, if we want to think about it that way, a report from the Williams Institute at UCLA Law estimates that over 54,000 transitioning transgender youth, so people who are currently transitioning on puberty blockers, socially transitioning, ages 13 through 17 are at risk losing access to their gender affirming medical care, even when doctors, therapists, parents concur the need for those treatments. And in 3 of those states, it would impact about 4,000 18 to 20-year-olds as well. So this is, we're small, trans people are small in number percentage wise, but that's still an incredible amount of people to lose care that they're already receiving. And then this is extending, and a lot of people are talking about the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, which prohibits explicit classroom instruction related to gay, lesbian, trans issues, sexuality, gender more broadly, in like that K through 13 content. And then all the ages above it is as developmentally appropriate, which that's not going to be any scientific standard, right? Someone's going to come up with, oh, it's not developmentally appropriate for my 12-year-old to learn what a gay person is the kind of logic that they're using around this ban. And it's not just about removing queer and trans people from education curriculums, it's about reduced representation for those students. It's reduced learning that those students have. I always think I didn't come out as a trans person until I was in grad school, because I literally was never taught about transness and queerness in my sex education. So imagining kids not even being able to see that representation in books or anything like that is kind of horrifying. And this is really a tactic to bring more shame and fear, and use power to reinforce that it is shameful to be queer and trans, which leads to increased violence and mental health concerns in trans people. It also brings about copycat laws, which many of you may not know, or many of you might be thinking, well, thank God that's Florida, that never happens here in Minnesota. Well, it did. We had a copycat Don't Say Gay bill introduced in the Minnesota House just a couple weeks ago, and have had other anti-trans legislation, including sports bans. So I think it's really important to remember that queer and trans people are not safe just because we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic lead on the House. Like, these bills are being introduced and being discussed. And if any of you have ever listened to a House floor session where they start talking anti-LGBTQ, it is pretty horrific. So these people are here in Minnesota, and I think it's important for us to remember that this isn't just a problem of Texas and Alabama and Florida. It's right here too. And so the last kind of topic that I want to touch on, last 2 topics, is book banning and then the groomers narrative. So we're seeing another huge increase in book banning, and being very frank, these are books about Black and LGBTQ people. And by removing these books and banning these books very publicly, it further stigma, continues to ostracize identities, and just, reducing the way that kids can learn about who they are. And then you also might be hearing a groomer narrative, or where people are calling trans adults groomers, or people who teach young people about sexuality or gender, they're calling them groomers as if they are grooming them into queer individuals later. This is a blatantly false narrative. It is completely untrue, and it is another way to portray queer and trans people as predators of children, which they are not. This goes very in line with people saying, trans women don't belong in women's bathrooms because they are just, and again, this is completely false and incorrect, but that they're just men trying to dress up and harm children. again, it's just portraying queer and trans people in a horrible light. And it also takes the autonomy away from queer youth who find themselves in that time, who see other queer individuals and learn more about themselves, who are able to read and do that learning on their own. And it makes it seem like that their identity is untrue because it had been quote unquote groomed. And again, these are completely horrific, disgusting narratives, and have no truth to them other than to increase harm. And the one last thing that I'll talk about, and I'll turn my slides off for this, as a lot of you know, Roe v. Wade is under a lot of threat with the SCOTUS leak that we saw last week. And Roe v. Wade is just another example of continued attacks on bodily autonomy. And this is not just bodily autonomy as far as reproductive rights, but also for queer and trans people. We saw that in that SCOTUS leak decision, that Obergefell, which is the case that brought us gay marriage, is potentially under threat. Anti-sodomy laws are potentially under threat, and just increases in reduced autonomy for queer and trans people in the same. And so, and I say this too, because queer and trans issues are also reproductive, issues. They're issues of bodily autonomy, and they become issues of cisgender non-queer people very fast, as, many, women's rights, also ends up fitting into there. And I'm seeing a lot of people talking about reducing women's bodily autonomy and other autonomy. And so a lot of these issues are very interconnected, which is why it's important to care about them, not just being a queer and trans person, yourself, but as an ally, because likely an issue that impacts a queer and trans person will impact you in some way down the line. So that's kind of my little overview of things that are happening right now. It is very brief, because I swear if I went into details, we would all be very depressed at the end of this. So, I do encourage you to take time to look up some of these bills and read about them and see what people are saying, and, what these bills mean, and look them up in our state too. See who is trying to pass those bills, who is introducing them, who is giving them any credence. It's important to keep educated as we keep seeing these attacks. So, Jack, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, TL, for that overview. I think it's really important not just to hear about those things in a vacuum on the news. One thing happens, another thing happens, but they're all connected. So this overview, as TL was alluding to, might feel a little bit overwhelming or confusing or depressing. The question that many of us might have is, why are all of these things that are such violations to many of our values, to the values that folks were expressing at the beginning of the conversation about why they care, why are these things gaining traction in 2022? Aren't we past this? And it might be easy to think that the opposition, that these groups out there and politicians out there who are advancing these attacks and advancing these pieces of legislation, it might be easy to just think that they're getting more and more extreme and just grasping at whatever straws that they can, that they're not really guided by any really thought or strategy, that they are just blinded by hate and they can't really clearly see a strategic plan to advance their cause. So they're just lashing out in ways that some of us might even scoff at for their ridiculousness. I've seen that a little bit online and in a couple conversations in person, kind of people just laughing it off. Look at how ridiculous these folks are, putting forward these terrible things that no one would ever buy into. And the reality is that this is pretty wishful and even dangerous thinking, and somewhat of an escape hatch from reality. We can't actually downplay the seriousness of these attacks and need to look directly at what we're up against, and be clear about what it is that's going on. And so all of these different tactics of attacking trans youth, of banning books, of pushing for Don't Say Gay, and various other tactics that they are advancing here are really part of a unified, coherent strategy. A strategy to create confusion about trans people, who they are, what they need and deserve from this world, in order to demonize them, It is a strategy to reframe trans and queer people as deviant or destructive to traditional American values and communities and threatening to children. And it's a strategy to dehumanize the LGBTQIA+ community broadly, as well as their allies. So I think that includes everyone in this Zoom room and out there in the church. As TL was saying, trans and queer issues become cis and straight issues very quickly. We see this in the groomer narrative, where it's not just trans and queer people who are being attacked and demonized for being quote unquote groomers, but also straight folks out there who are allies, who are being attacked in some circumstances. And so, as TL was alluding to, this also has a racialized component to it too. It's not just about trans and queer people. Fear-mongering about critical race theory and how it is also a threat to traditional American values, accomplishes the same purpose of confusion and dehumanization. And groomer panic or CRT panic, they both become shorthand for any form of speech that falls outside the narrow window of acceptance and conformity to quote unquote traditional American values. And so the question is why? Why are they doing this? What is the purpose of this strategy? And ultimately, it is to continue the erosion of the public's faith in a multiracial democracy that includes all of us, across race, across gender, across ethnicity, across religion. You know, having a free and fair multiracial democratic society doesn't just happen through wishful thinking. It doesn't just happen because our Constitution says it or aspires to it or that we hope that it happens. It needs to be fostered, and at its core, it rests upon the ability of different factions of society being able to overcome differences in opinion and values by forming power coalitions and negotiating collective solutions that the majority of the population can buy into and accept as legitimate. But then what happens when one side and the opinions and values that they hold come to be framed by the other side as inherently illegitimate and even inhuman? What happens when one side would rather not need to have support from a majority of the public in order to enforce their agenda? So these attacks on trans youth, on LGBTQIA folks broadly, on people of color, they set up a narrative or an argument that some are being bought into, or that are buying into, or are being lured into, that the idea of a multiracial, multigender, diverse democracy is deeply and existentially threatening to them. And that the just answer is to take previously unthought of steps to cement an oppressive minority rule as the only way to preserve their quote unquote American values. I think we have seen and felt this in different ways in our society right now. And this sort of narrative, in it becomes acceptable and right from their point of view because of how deviant and depraved their opposition has framed to be, how their opposition has been framed to be inhuman. And so if your opposition is not really human, if they are acting in ways that are counter to your values on a deep, deep level and are putting forward values that are hurtful to your family, well, then the old rules of civility no longer apply. And it sets up a clear justification for a sinking into authoritarian tendencies in government that don't truly serve the interests of any person or community, no matter their identified political party or political identity. And so we can look at history and see that this has played out before. This is not new. This is a textbook that is being played out of. You know, race and sex panics have been central to the rise of fascist movements. I think if we look back at history of the rise of Nazis in Germany, Berlin at one point in the 20s and 30s was one of the most sexually progressive places in the world. It had really open communities and a different world than what took power a few years later. And panics over this sort of thing were used to drive the rise of Nazis in Germany. And so this reality can feel overwhelming. And I think the question for all of us then becomes, thinking about all these things happening, thinking about what they mean, what do all of us as members of the trans and queer and broader LGBTQIA community and as allies, what do we do about it? And I think the answer, and Kylie will talk a little bit more about the role of an ally, and TL and I will have a few more steps of things moving forward. But one of the answers is together, standing up loudly and being explicitly clear about our values and where we stand. That is our path forward. Offense is the best defense. Some of you may have heard or seen the speech from a state senator in Michigan. Her name is Mallory McMorrow. Are there folks here, if you nod your head, people that heard or saw that? I'm seeing some nods, some not. I'm gonna share that video. I think we've got a little bit of time. She is a straight, white, Christian woman who is a state senator in Michigan, and she was attacked by her opponent for being a groomer. And in response, she didn't hide. She didn't stop talking about trans and queer issues. She stood up on the floor of the Michigan Senate and spoke out and was really clear. And so I might be freezing up as I'm trying to open this YouTube video. So I may have to send it around afterward, or I might just put it in the chat here for folks. But she has set a really clear example of how we can stand up and be clear about where we stand. And not all of us are going to be the state senator from Michigan making a powerful speech, but we all have a role to play in advancing that narrative of who we are and what we're about and who deserves to have space and power and presence in our society. So I will put that in the chat. And I think I'll pass it over to Kylie.
Yeah, that was great, TL and Jack. Thanks for sharing all that. So I am a straight cis individual, but I stand with the LGBTQ community, and I want to be an ally, and not just an ally, but a good ally. And I'm kind of here to share like my experiences being an ally and like my mistakes, my growth, my struggles in doing so. And so like my brother is gay, and it was always hard for him to kind of express his sexuality in my household because my parents are immigrants and they follow really traditional culture, and talking about things like that was kind of like a taboo topic. And I really feel like growing up in an environment like that really conditioned me to be somewhat of like a silent supporter. And so like I cared about these topics, like I cared about like the community, but I never like acted upon them. I didn't realize how damaging that can be. And so the same can go for like a lot of people who might be in the same boat of being kind of like, a silent supporter. And there needs to be more to allyship than just like saying that you care or just being silent about it. Like just because, oh yeah, like you don't hate these groups of people doesn't mean like you're an ally. You want to act for it, because obviously we have heard all about all these like attacks on trans youth and everything. But like if we're silent about it, we're not going to do anything to change that. And so nowadays, a lot of people take advantage of the term allyship too, because people use allyship to avoid criticism or to join trends in the media. They support marginalized groups because everyone else is doing it, or because it's making national news, and so they want to be part of the trend, but they haven't really done anything with their privileges to support these groups to their best ability. And I can't stress enough how important it is to use your privileges for these marginalized groups, because what you have as like, your race, your gender, your sexuality, your education level, your socioeconomic status, all those privileges can be used to support marginalized groups because you have that privilege that they don't have. And so one of the important things I've learned while trying to become a better ally was that it's really important to be public about allyship and to show that we care, because it's more than, we can't just say that we care, we have to show that we care. It's more than putting like a pride sticker like on your laptop or going to pride festivals. Like we need to do more than saying we are an ally to check off a box to meet DEI requirements or to be on the right side of history. I've seen a lot of like organizations have like DEI committees, but not have anyone who, you know, are part of diverse groups on that board. And it's kind of ironic. And it means no say like I am no perfect ally either. And there is no perfect ally, but there's always a growing one who's willing to kind of learn how to be better, to stay in the loop, to educate themselves. So like, you know, I'm not perfect. It was just like the other day, like I was tabling for like my first time with Planned Parenthood, and we provide like barrier methods. And TL here, I said I was talking to someone and I was talking about female condoms, and TL here was like, "Did you just say female condom?" Like, no, like they're innies. And I had to like pause a bit there and kind of process. And then I realized that like I wasn't using like inclusive language, and thought about how that can like further translate into my work in this field. And so I think like internal reflection is one of the best things you can do as an ally, taking the time to like learn about the community, to stay in the loop on like news and attacks, and like talking to individuals of this community like directly, you know, like to show that like, you know, you do more than just say that you care, like you're willing to speak to individuals of this community. And so like using your privileges, understanding structural oppressions and how that has affected these communities, speaking up, but not speaking for the LGBT community is super important, and supporting and uplifting like certain organizations that organize for, you know, these communities. And so these ways of being like a good ally can translate not just in like being an ally to the LGBTQ community, but like being an ally just in any marginalized community. And so, you know, that's kind of all I have to say on like my part of like being an ally. So I'm grateful to have like the opportunity to, you know, speak here and kind of be part of a team with TL, and to be connected with Jack and the rest of you guys. It was really nice to see you all here.
Yeah, thank you, Kylie. I think, yeah, and I think one other reason we definitely wanted Kylie here is to really drive home that queer and trans rights is, yeah, everyone's here, and we need our allies just as much as we need queer and trans voices in this fight too. And so I'm really glad that all of you are here to be better allies, or to be more knowledgeable, or to maybe start taking those first steps. So Jack and I have a couple different things that you can do, because you might be being like, okay, well, what do I do about all of this? You know, one thing that I also want to say, because we had a lot of not great news in this presentation, but while there is a big attack, there is also people fighting for us. I literally just before this meeting saw an article that said 19 states are moving to pass trans protections, which is like incredible. And that's the stuff that we need to see. We need to see offense, like Jack said, instead of just defense against this. But we have a we have a document put together. We'll drop a link in the chat and we'll make sure it gets sent to everyone, that has some links and some also just actions that you can start taking now. So the first thing I want to say is, if you have financial ability, donating is a really big deal. So the first layer that I would always say is donating to local GoFundMes. Like if you know someone who's fundraising for top surgery or any other kind of gender affirming care, donating to their GoFundMe. Or if you can't donate, maybe you make food or help support them post, you know, surgeries or things like that, or see other ways that you might be able to help support them as they're trying to access their care. And then the next step that I would say for donating or volunteering is finding organizations that are doing this work. So in this document, like I said, we will link this. I have two different sections of a couple links, and these are not, this is a non-exhaustive list. I just grabbed a couple that I thought fit really well. I have some links specifically for to support trans youth in Texas who are currently feeling a brunt of the bans. And then I also have a section that is local Minnesota organizations like Reclaim, which is a mental health org and helps provide mental health and other resource access. Outfront Minnesota, who does a lot of really great advocacy work around the state. And then I also linked, which a lot of you may be familiar with, Out Rochester, which is a local social group that is continue to make space for queer people in Rochester and doing really great work to lift it up. So those are a couple easy first tiers is donate if you have money. And if you don't have money, yeah, when I had top surgery myself, I was so thankful for the people who helped me get meals because I wasn't able to lift my arms up, so I couldn't reach my plates and cook. So it was really nice to have someone bring me over a nice warm cooked meal while I was recovering, or helping me get food. So that stuff goes a long way. And a lot of you mentioned you have queer and trans people in your life. So seeing what they might need too, or even sending them, hey, $25, here's lunch, that those things can go a really long way as far as mutual aid support. And then I'm going to turn it to Jack for a couple what we call power building actions, or actions that aren't just donating and fundraising.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, TL. If you're able to drop that link in the chat so that folks can check that document out, and for folks who are there in person, maybe Luke will chat afterward about what is the best way to get this document to folks so that folks can think about how they can be stepping up. There's also a social media piece. Kylie linked a folder to some graphics that folks can share about being a good ally. And then I included that link to that video of the state senator clearly standing up and stating her values on these issues, being unafraid and clear in a way that we all can learn from, I think, no matter where we are in this fight. On top of social media and getting a message out about where you stand and some of the mutual aid that TL was referring to, there are ways that we can come together to build people power and take action together. I think I'm having some connectivity issues, so my notes have disappeared. Okay, they're back, and I hope everyone can hear me and I'm not cutting out too badly. But first, on that level of power building and community building, if you identify as a member of the community, of the broader LGBTQIA plus community, or you are questioning whether you may not be a part of those things, or whether you might be, and you would like to join a conversation about what it looks like here in Rochester to form, for the lack of a better term, a queer and trans people's organizing project to create something that is not just about having safe spaces together, but actually organizing together to create real space and place and public presence in the community for queer and trans people to have real and public and visible power and presence. Let me know. Stephen, who's on here, and I have been talking about these ideas of building a group of folks who are coming together, not just to create space that is safe for ourselves, but to be taking action together. So if you identify as a member of the community and are interested in that, please send me a private message if you're on the Zoom here, or if you are there in person, I will brainstorm with Luke about what is the best way to make that connection. So I invite anyone who might resonate with that idea to think about coming into a conversation about what that looks like to create something like that together. And I know TL is very interested in being a part of creating that sort of thing as well. And then for the rest of folks, I think that's probably the majority of people in this Zoom room and there at the church who don't identify as a member of the community, but as an ally of some shape or form. I think the question leading out of today's conversation is, what does it look like for your church, for your congregation, for you to step up in your work to be open and affirming? what sort of follow-up action or event that is not just about education, but about actually actual real action and presence. What sort of thing along those lines can we plan in partnership for late summer or fall that builds community and an outward, explicit, loud declaration of the kind of acceptance and presence and power that trans and queer people deserve in our community? So that is my invitation to all of you and to the Wide Welcoming team to be really contemplating and thinking upon what is it that we are called to do and be that goes beyond educating ourselves and feeling better about knowing more. It's always good to know more and to feel more secure as an ally that you know the right things to say or do. But for folks that are out there struggling and suffering, being just accepted and affirmed isn't always enough, especially when we're up against some really big forces who want to be erasing many of us from our society. So that is a big invitation, but one that I think that we need to make and think about, what is the role of us individually and as a congregation to have a presence in taking that level of action. And then finally, just want to name a couple of upcoming events to invite folks to that are not necessarily connected to the issues we talked about tonight. But I know that Kylie, I don't know if you want to say a few words. Here in Rochester is planning a rally of some form in June. After the Roe decision is official, sometime in June, there will be a rally for folks to gather together and to speak out. And then sooner than that, this upcoming Sunday, Isaiah and Faith in Minnesota are having a picnic in the park at East Silver Lake Park from 1 to 3 p.m. this upcoming Sunday, mostly to gather and share food together, but also to get some updates about the end of this legislative session. So if you are interested in joining that conversation and that gathering in the park this Sunday, there's a link, a sign-up link in that document that we shared. But Kylie, do you have anything to add about the planned rally in June?
Yeah, no, that's kind of in the works right now, but I can tell you that like this Saturday, we're having like kind of our National Day of Action. And so you guys are all invited to go rally in the Twin Cities to kind of, in honor of this Supreme Court leak. Supposed to be a huge amount of people up there, so go at your own risk, using COVID precautions. And then with regards to like a Rochester rally after the Supreme Court decision, we don't know when they'll release that, but there's kind of like an estimate, maybe like June, probably late June. I just decided to kind of do that rally later to kind of get enough people power, kind of build enough have enough people on board, because Rochester can kind of be a tricky place to kind of get people to come together. And so been working with a bunch of different other like organizations in Rochester, and hopefully that we can get enough orgs together to kind of rally up enough people in the community who care about not just like kind of like we addressed today, like reproductive rights, or don't just affect women, but they are just kind of the stepping stone in attacks on other human rights as well. So just look forward to something, maybe on a Facebook event, or we'll share with Jack about like the date specific or kind of more details, but that's all I have to say.
And that really brings us to the end of our time. I want to thank you all for having us and for listening and engaging in this conversation. I think I'm willing, and Kylie maybe as well, to stick around if folks have any question or discussion that they want to have about these things. I don't know what timing or scheduling looks like there on your end, Luke, or if you have any interest in pulling up that YouTube video and playing it for folks there in the room. But I think that brings us to the end of the formal forum tonight. Thank you, everyone. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jack. I think what I'll do, I'll keep this open for just a second, and I'll pull those links from the chat and have those on my computer so that folks here, if you wanted to send me an email, I can respond to those. I can try to remember who all is here and find your emails, but if you'd like them, please email me, just revluke@urochmn.org. But thank you, Jack and Kylie, and I know TL had to go. for this work in the community and bringing this to us and the call to do more. So I just have a very brief closing words, if that's all right, and then I'll pull these links together and get them to folks. So take a breath in gratitude for all that we've been witness to and holding together and will continue to. And I am recalling the words of Wayne Arneson, who said, "Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone." May that be our work. And then I'll turn the video back to the comments so they can wave their gratitude to our presenters. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks, Jack. And we'll continue the work. All right, be well. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you.